Hi guys. I just wanted to walk you guys through how you would fill out this note catcher and how you will be filling out the note catcher using the videos and the text that I provided for today. You are going to look at how the suffragettes used the courts, how they passed city and state laws, and how they passed, well, spoiler, but how they worked towards passing constitutional amendments as part of their action for social change. In the articles that I gave you, it does not talk about their work to pass a federal law, partially because of that time period. That wasn't really, a federal means national, like the whole country. That wasn't really one of their main strategies. But I read a different article that's about later on in the 1950s and then 60s that talks about how one of the most famous suffragettes, actually, Alice Paul, who will come up in your readings, ended up getting involved in passing a federal law later, even though they had the vote to get more women's rights otherwise. So after I read this article, it talked a lot actually about the civil rights movement for African Americans. And it also talked a lot about Lyndon Johnson and JFK, as well as Alice Paul. So those are just the characters that were in this article. That is literally this first column, groups and people associated. Alice Paul was always trying to have things happen at a national level. She was also a big advocate for the constitutional amendments, we'll see. And I know from this that she was someone who was associated strongly with this, the civil rights movement for African Americans. And in there, they talk specifically about MLK, but other civil rights leaders as well. And then the person who ultimately signs the law, because this law does work, is Lyndon Johnson, who was the president at that time. So describe the strategy and how it was used. In this, I'm really just going to use broad strokes to describe what happened, how is this strategy employed, and how did the suffragettes get there? So I saw in my article that after there was a public outcry about the treatment of African Americans in many southern states, civil rights leaders had momentum to push for federal law. They argued basically that since we can't trust the leaders in southern states to be fair, a national or federal law is necessary. So they get the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is drafted in Congress, and however, what happens, I'm pulling all this from the article, you'll be pulling it more directly, I just read it. However, many senators don't want the law to pass. And interestingly, so the law would have protected African Americans from civil rights abuses, and there are many senators at the time period that didn't want the law to pass. And there was also feminists who were working for women's rights rights activists who were saying, oh, this is a civil rights act. It shouldn't just apply to race, but it should apply to gender as well. And these senators who didn't want the law to pass, they, so I should really have put that before. So women's rights activists like Alice Paul want gender to be included in law in addition to race. But we see that some senators don't want the law to pass for race or gender. And so they're very sneaky in this situation and agree to add gender. It was originally just about race because they think the law will fail if it's included. So basically, they know that they don't want this law to pass at all, and they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, Alice Paul, come on in, add gender," which was not part of the law that was drafted by the civil rights movement that was focused on race, specifically equality for Black Americans. Because they're like, "Oh, no one's going to vote for it. It'll be fine. If we add gender, it'll definitely fail." But the women's rights activists and civil rights movement leaders end up working together to change public opinion and make people support the law. So they basically, the strategy, they're like, okay, well, now it's about women and Black people. So if we message like to both those groups at the same time, like get everyone supporting the law, we'll have a stronger coalition and people will have to pass it. And the outcome was the Civil Rights Act is a really important law that was passed. So the public pressure worked. The strategy to get the federal law passed by forming a coalition between women and Black Americans for civil rights put enough pressure on the president and Congress to pass the law. However, I'm not just saying, did a law get passed, or did a law get passed in the city or whatever down here, or did the courts work, whatever. This also means, was the strategy effective in dealing with these issues? So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was effective in many ways in improving conditions nationwide for Black people and women. However, there was a lot of problems that they wanted it to fix that it still didn't. So the law was somewhat effective, improving some of the worst abuses of power in southern states. But however, many problems persisted for both women and Black Americans that the law was intended to address. Specifically, something that came up was that one of the big problems was that the suppression of the vote, which we've looked at so much, right? Voter suppression. Voting was not particularly affected by this. So Black people were still having a lot of trouble voting after this law was passed. Voting rights weren't really improved until another federal law was passed the next year. So they used the same strategy because they saw that there were some gains, and then they were like, oh, we got to pass another law because people are still suppressing the right to vote for Black Americans. I mean, people are still suppressing the right to vote for Black Americans now, but it was that was one of the things that the Civil Rights Act was supposed to address, and it didn't successfully address that aspect. So they had to wait another year and pass another law. So basically, I'm just describing here like what happened, what was going on, what was the problem they were trying to face, and how did people try to use the strategy. In this case, they put pressure on the senators. This is just what happened going there. And then what happened? Did the law get passed, or did the courts rule in favor of them? Did the amendment get passed? What was it called? And that's always really important. Like if a law got passed or an amendment got passed or anything, you definitely want to include the title, right? This is all basically about the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So what you are going to do is just read I only used one article, so you really saw me at the end as if I had already watched both the videos and read the text. But what you guys should do is you watch a video and you get some information, put it in, say I got a little bit of one bullet point or two in each thing, but then I read the text later and I'm like, oh, this talks more about how they use the courts. You need to remember to go back and add to whatever section it makes sense in. That was not a perfect model of this because this information is not in the sources that you were given, but you need to know that you're adding information after each source. So if I just read this one long article, I got a lot of information about this from this article because this is a way longer article than I had you guys read. Look at, oof. I mean, it was a good article, but it was really long. You're watching very short videos and then reading a one-page text. After each video or each text, you're seeing where did I get information to complete the note catcher? And you can add from multiple sources, okay? So that's it. You're just gonna fill out the other 3 on your own and go for it.